Hey, I'm Paul Verge with Grand Theft World, and this is Mark Carney and his 5 eyes.
I welcome you to our land, America. We are soon to be...
well, there was a border when I came, John.
When was the last time you checked Twitter? So you've really involved yourself in... I remember you from 2008, and I mean this. Your work in helping Canada get through the economic crisis of 2008, the financial crisis that hit this country terribly, and I thought made a lot of really painful decisions for the people of this country. I thought Canada avoided the worst of that. And I believe you played a very strong role in that.
We did. I mean, thank you. We did.
You're so, you don't want
well,
to be with...
we're proud. We find you very attractive, but we're not moving in with you. It's not you. It's us. We do things a little differently in Canada. We believe in.
I just want to,
providing...
before you go any further, I'm up for it. We're up for it. Whatever you do differently. We want to experiment too. What do you guys want?
So they're kind of priming you with this idea of what's an experiment, maybe some sort of integration. We want to have closer ties. Would that be in our interests? Possibly. Would it be in someone else's interests? Definitely.
You want
we can be friends. There can be a few benefits, John. Friends with benefits, but not all the way.
This is totally not
benefits
rehearsed.
Of trade, benefits of defense.
Right.
Yeah,
no, we'll be cool about it. We won't.
Yeah.
Is it easier to deal with someone that is transactional at his core in that way? Take your time.
No, I'm going to take my time. No, I think in the end it's not. Because in the end, in a relationship, I'm going to keep the relationship
Oh my
thing.
God.
If we're going to build...
Did you just get out of therapy? What is happening?
They want to have a deeper relationship.
Karate Kid movie. Like there's something very, very off-putting. What is he like in person?
Stammers.
Karate.
Take your time.
You're not far off. He is.
So this
hypothetical. Let's
whole
say
event was before Mark Carney took over as the Prime Minister for all of Canada, without a single citizen voting for him other than a small select few in the Liberal Party itself. They were supposed to have between 400,000 and 600,000 people in the Liberal Party voting for his leadership amongst many candidates.
Candidate wasn't part of the government. Let's say the candidate did have a lot of economic experience. Let's say the candidate did deal with crises. Let's say the candidate had a plan to deal with the challenges in the here and now.
Sneaky, you're running as an outsider.
I am an outsider.
Wow.
An outsider who was, as you'll learn, the head of both the Bank of Canada and the head of the Bank of England. So this man is a central banker to his core. And whether you believe central bankers have your interests at heart or the interests of a larger agenda for central bankers, well, we're going to get into and explore a little bit about that.
Wow, that's all. So you're going to be coming in there to say, I have not been in the government. I have worked in the financial markets. I understand all the things that go around trade. I mean, you worked, look, let's take the California fires. You've done an awful lot with the banks, with insurance industries. So you understand.
Yeah, the insurance companies that are denying everyone the ability to rebuild because it's almost impossible to get insurance in any of these places where you'd actually need or want insurance. Just a coincidence.
Understand very particularly what's happening out there in California.
Very particularly, I mean...
All right, so this meet between Mark Carney and Jon Stewart is essentially a coronation ceremony to introduce him to the public, of course, the American public, and then the Canadian public that watches American television. It's to seed the idea that Mark Carney would be an excellent outsider candidate, and with all his special business acumen, almost like a Trump-type guy who's just been a little more private. And as you'll learn, he does have some public photos with some very interesting characters. But Mark Carney was positioning himself for the upcoming leadership race that happened last month, I guess. And this appearance on Jon Stewart was meant to be the seeding or the breadcrumbs to inoculate the American public to this idea of Trudeau's replacement. After all, Trudeau has been the Prime Minister for 10 years in Canada, and his popularity had decreased, and the number of people who really loathe him had increased quite a lot. Mark Carney gets to come in as fresh blood, pulling a little Joe Biden, Kamala Harris switch, except this guy's supposed to be more capable and more wise, and he's gonna tackle Trump. So let's just dive into exactly what kind of man and politician and supposed outsider that Mark Carney actually is. So I would recommend really great video. I'm just going to show you a little clip from it from Moose on the Loose on YouTube.
My government is going to do is to use all of the powers of the federal government, including the emergency powers.
Wow, quite the development we've got here. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today we're finding it was Mark Carney was behind the locking of the bank accounts for the Freedom Convoy. He was the man pushing for all of this. So we got this article here. It says it's time to end the sedition in Ottawa by enforcing the law and following the money. Sedition, treason, insurrection, mutiny. This article is about saying the Freedom Convoy was trying to overthrow the government. That is not what it was about. So first off, let's take a look at the Freedom Convoy timeline here. So we've got the world event that happened in 2022. It says January 13th, CBC Radio reports that government has mandated all truck drivers crossing the border must be poked. This started to escalate. People start gathering. So by the late January here, the convoy starts up. Basically by the 29th, many supporters protest in Ottawa. The people arrive, honking horns, bouncy castles, all that good stuff. Peaceful protesting. By February 5th, the Daily Hive says protesters barbecued food, played hockey, and set up bouncy castles with their children to play in. Global News reported 1,000 vehicles and 5,000 people. Something as interesting happened on February 7th. Before we look at that, we'll look at February 14th. So Justin Trudeau invokes the Emergencies Act on February 14th, as we see here. So FinTrack temporarily powers to monitor transactions and potentially freeze accounts. So they did. They froze bank accounts. They froze a lot of bank accounts. What we're talking about here today is this. This article comes from February 7th. 2022. This is a week before Justin Trudeau froze the bank accounts of Canadians. Well, where did Justin Trudeau get the idea? Who was pushing it? Mark Carney contributed to the Globe and Mail. This article is Mark Carney's words. Mark Carney is an Ottawa resident and former governor of the Bank of Canada and Bank of England. Really? Is he an Ottawa resident, or was he living in America and just owns a house in Ottawa? The goals of the leadership of the so-called Freedom Convoy were clear from the start: to remove from power the government that Canadians elected less than 6 months ago. Their blatant treachery was dismissed as comic. So it goes on to say here, on the first weekend, there's peaceful objectives, but now in the second week, no one should have any doubt this is sedition. Mark Carney painting an image here that Canadians are overthrowing the government. Somehow I don't picture bouncy castles as a part of an insurrection of the government. They're not patriots. This is not about restoring freedom, but beginning anarchy. This isn't getting carried away at a rally. It's not a rush of blood to the head. It's deliberate and calculated, and because of that, they must know that from now on, there will be consequences for their actions. The constant blaring of horns at all hours, the bugging of people, the culture of fear will bankrupt our businesses, and if left unchecked, would help achieve the convoy's goal of undermining our democracy and rule of law. Those who are still helping to extend this occupation must be identified and punished to the full force of the law. Oh really? Mark Carney not a fan of the Freedom Convoy. Drawing the line means choking off the money that financed this occupation. Cutting off the bank accounts was Mark Carney's idea. He posted it a week before. He was Justin Trudeau's advisor. Justin Trudeau made the ultimate decision to do it. Jumping ahead, Mark Carney's suggestion here to Justin Trudeau turned out to be unconstitutional. But by now, anyone sending money to the convoy should be in no doubt you are funding sedition. Foreign funders of an insurrection interfered in our domestic affairs from the start. Canadian authorities should take every step within the law to identify and thoroughly punish them. The involvement of foreign governments and any officials connected to them should be identified, exposed, and addressed. I know from experience that crises don't end by themselves. You can't spin your way out of failure. You must recognize the scale of the challenge, devise a clear plan, and implement it methodically and deliberately. Your determination to do so can never be in doubt. Then and only then can order be restored. In this case, that means enforcing the law, following the money. Individuals must be held responsible for their lawlessness, and those who finance their actions must be dissuaded from ever doing so again. This is scathing stuff. Mark Carney was 100% behind pushing Trudeau, whispering in his ear to lock down bank accounts. That really ruined a lot of people's lives. That cost a lot of hell in people's lives. This man cannot be prime minister. It's gross that he's even our temporary prime minister, unelected prime minister. Seems very likely that Justin Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act because Mark Carney told him to do so. Mark Carney has been arm in arm with the Liberal establishment for years. They wanted to have him as prime minister for the longest time. You can see it here on his Wikipedia page. Carney was approached by the Liberal Party to run for leader in their 2013 leadership election. They wanted him instead of Justin Trudeau. He ultimately declined to do so. So Mark Carney's probably had a lot of pull in this party for a long time. Now, we haven't forgot about this clip already, have we?
And something that my government is going to do is to use all of the powers of the federal government, including the emergency powers of the federal government, to accelerate the major projects that we need in order to build this economy and take on the Americans.
Now, there is a distinction there to be made. Emergency powers different than the Emergencies Act, but no normal prime minister talks like that. They don't talk about using emergency powers to get things done. And what's really bizarre about this too, he talks about how people should be punished. Well, how about the people who rob banks? You see guys driving up to a bank like Scotiabank with a backhoe and they just rip out an ATM out of the building. These people don't get punished. Home invaders, people come in with their pew-pews, stealing cars and break-in enters. These people get an ankle bracelet and they go home. They play Xbox, some home arrest. That's not punishing people to the full extent of the law like he says in this article. It should really make Canadians wonder who this guy is. Is he some friendly banker? Or does he have a dark, sinister agenda? His actions speak as loud as his words here. The whole situation recently with Donald Trump and Mark Carney is very suspicious. But one person who will actually stand up for Canada is Pierre Poilievre.
Luc Couture with CTV News. The campaign director for Ontario Premier Doug Ford, Corey Tanaik, says you sound like Donald Trump. So if conservatives are saying that you sound too much like Donald Trump, how can you possibly stand up to the U.S. president?
Well, I'm the only one who will stand up to the U.S. president. I see that the president wants the Liberals back in because after a decade, a lost Liberal decade, with costs and crime up and the economy down under the American thumb, the president would love nothing more to keep the Liberals in power so that he can keep abusing our economy and taking advantage of Canada. The question Canadians will have to answer is whether they think the Liberals are owed a fourth mandate after they drove up costs and crime and weakened our economy, or whether it's time to put Canada first with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, green light projects, build homes, bring home the jobs so that we can stand up to the Americans from a position of strength.
Let's see, he's 60 years old, so yeah, 1945, 55, 65, there we go. And he was born in the Northwest Territories, which is, of course, the Arctic area that has a connection to Greenland on one side and Russia on the other, and is, of course, a hot topic for people talking about defense because of the fact that under supposed global warming, the Arctic ice shelf is receding and becoming more passable, whereas previously it was solid ice and really hard to traverse through in terms of moving loads of cargo. So it's become of geostrategic importance to a number of countries to see who controls the Arctic Circle and the emerging waterways that are supposedly coming about there. Now, Carney has painted himself, I played hockey, I'm as Canadian as it comes, I'm from the North, but he's really an internationalist. And so you can see there is a lot going on where he is not avoiding the media all the time, but he's already been in office for about 2 weeks and scandals are emerging. Everything from accusations that he plagiarized his doctoral thesis, ties to Jared Kushner, we'll have to see about that, and an MP who named Paul Chang, who offered a supposed bounty on another potential MP who's running in the election for the Conservatives. So The upcoming election in Canada is in April 28th, and it is going to be important for a number of reasons, least of which is the Liberals have been in power for 10 years, and this would be a fourth term, which is pretty unprecedented. And the only counterbalance to what the Liberals have been doing, which has led to a huge increase in the cost of living in Canada, they are making efforts to try and, all these different spending measures that are going to result in either higher taxes or more financial difficulty. And so the battle is really becoming who's going to solve inflation. And what you discover is that Mark Carney is credited as being the one to have helped solve or work Canada through the 2008 financial crisis. But he was also advising the Liberals in Canada during the COVID financial crisis, which you'll notice both of those events resulted in lowering of interest rates, but also printing of lots of money, which leads to inflation. So the inflationary imposition that happened around the 2008-2010 time and the inflation that happened in the 2020 to 2023 time, those are both driven by central bankers printing way more money than they normally would and then dispersing that into the monetary supply, mostly through the corporations first and then trickling down to the less financially well-to-do. And the end result of having all that much more money in the money supply system means each individual dollar decreases in value. So your purchasing power for people who've saved money, it decreases. And that what that looks like is, homes are getting more expensive, food's getting more expensive, gas is getting more expensive, energy is getting more expensive. Consumer goods from outside the country may or may not, but all the things that we look at as staples, the monthly costs, suddenly they're increasing, and they're increasing by a lot, not just 5-10%, but like 20-25%. How can that be? Did my house suddenly just grow in value, in actual value? Is food suddenly more valuable to each person? What about energy? Is there just such a high demand, or is there something else at play? And what it comes down to is the more dollars there are in circulation, the less value each individual dollar has, and thus the more of those dollars you need to buy the same stuff. So a car that might have cost $25,000 in the 1990s, if that exact same car came out in 2025, just the price adjustment from $25,000 in 1990s dollars, that car would probably be 40, maybe 50,000, depending on how much the value of the dollar had devalued. And that's simply because it requires more of the same currency to purchase the same things. So all these gains that people see mostly in housing, they're kind of artificial. They're like inflated stock value because you just require more dollars. So when you sell your house, you might get $1.3 million and you paid $400,000 for the house. But now if you go to buy a house after that, you've got to pay $1.3 million, right? You're not going to find another $400,000 house. So what's the solution to that? Do we stop printing as much money? Do we have a deflationary correction? Do we just, increase the housing, stop the immigration? Well, these were all solutions that were being presented by the conservative side, Pierre Poilievre, to eliminate GST on new home purchases, to get rid of the climate carbon tax, and try and find different ways to bring down the cost of living. And ironically, after Trudeau fighting against these policy ideas from the conservative side, as soon as Mark Carney got in power, he adopted 3 or 4 of those policy ideas right away. Said, I'm getting rid of the carbon tax. Mark Carney was one of the authors of the carbon tax. So he's got Brookfield Asset Management. He's got his bachelor in economics. He went to Harvard University. No secret societies there. Master's in economics, doctorate in economics from Oxford. Was he a Rhodes Scholar? I'm not sure. 13 years with Goldman Sachs in London, Tokyo, New York, Toronto. So he lived in Canada for a little bit. Then he becomes the deputy governor of the Bank of Canada from 2004 up till 2008. and becomes the Senior Associate Deputy Minister of Finance. And then from 2008 to 2013, he is the governor of the Bank of Canada. So that's when he would have been in charge of a lot of the financial decisions. And that was when the Conservatives were in power in Canada. So when people see Carney come in and immediately take 3 or 4 of the Conservative platforms and just go, no, we're just going to do those right now. So now you don't have those to campaign on. Well, it's because he probably would have run for the Conservatives, because Carney's less of a guy who's a left or right leaning guy. He's a guy who cares about money. And so if it's a left leaning cause, climate change, he'll lean left to promote climate change, because he sees the end game, the big picture, as carbon tax, a tax on the air you breathe. And if we collect enough money from you and we price out energy and gas, we can change your habits. Mark Carney wants to change our behaviors to be more sustainable. And by sustainable, we need to consume less, eat less meat, use less energy. Never mind, could we increase and improve farming? Could we increase energy production and improve environmental fallout so that we can reduce the number of environmental spills that happen? All these things are possible, but instead of finding solutions for the consumption aspect, it's like, you guys need to slow your roll. Not us elites who run around on our private jets to different environmental conferences to preach against people flying around the world and traveling on road trips from place to place during the summer. How dare you contribute to the environmental disasters that are going on? Did you know if you eat enough hamburgers, it causes hurricanes and earthquakes? This is the kind of superstition stuff that's coming in. So climate change, very real. It's happening. You can look outside and see the climate literally changing before you. And in some areas it gets worse, and in some areas it gets more mild. And that changes from year to year. The climate is always changing. And do we have an effect on it? It's possible. It's entirely possible. But if you look at things from a grand scale, the amount of human activity that's existed and the amount of industrial activity that exists, there's no doubt that pollution exists and is a problem. Now, does pollution exist to the point where it can cause hurricanes and earthquakes? I don't know. Could forest fires be from our pollution? Maybe if it's heating up the earth, but what else could heat up the earth? Could it be the sun? Could it be volcanoes? There's so many factors, but the people who want to make more money off you have to convince you that it's you. You are the problem. It couldn't be another natural phenomenon. It couldn't be the natural heating and cooling cycles of the earth. They have to pump you full of fear and say, in order to alleviate this fear, you need to give us a tithe, a penance, and provide that as your contribution, your cost of living for the privilege of being alive on Earth. We need to tax the air you breathe, and you need to consume less. So less freedom, less liberty, less guidance of your own life, and you should give your own behavioral controls over to the government because they know what's best. And if they tell you that you're the cause of the problem, then you got to let them be the solution. That's kind of the eugenicist argument in a nutshell, when it's applied to macroeconomics and how do we extract as much energy from these people as possible while simultaneously lowering their standards of living. Now, what happened with Carney after the Bank of Canada in 2013? Well, he goes over to the Bank of England and decides to help implement some of his policies there, start generating the idea of the carbon tax, and trying to unify the Canadian and British systems together. Now, there'd been a lot of talk when Trump came in to talk about tariffs, to talk about Governor Trudeau and Canada's the 51st state, when really we would be the 51st through 60th states, because there's 10 provinces. And this really started to rile up Canadians who are very easily emotionally influenced by media, and they think Trump wants to literally take over Canada, which he may very well want to do. I do not truly know. But the fear factor introducing people to the idea that their bodily autonomy, sovereignty of their country, all these things that are the boogeyman of America right now, they've got lots of Canadians riled up. And in the midst of that, Trudeau appeared very weak, and so he decided to resign under all this pressure. And now Carney is the replacement who's come in and is meant to be the hero, right? He's meant to stand up against Trump, right? For example, Trump said, we're going to do all this tariff, 25% on cars. We're going to do all these really, aggressive things. It's leveling the playing field. And Carney's like, okay, well, you know what? Our relationship with the U.S. is over. We're going to have stronger ties with Europe. And then Trump's like, whoa. Or did he? They finally had their first discussion in the last couple of days. And suddenly the tone's cooled off. Now, is that a matter of Trump and Carney see eye to eye? Or is there some sort of blackmail scheme going on? Or is it all theatrics? And all of this was just like professional wrestling where Trump's playing the role of the heel and Carney gets to come in as the face and show him up and be the hero. And then let's solve this dispute by, what's the solution? Further integration? Let's create not a North American Union, but some kind of security and prosperity agreement that's on steroids. Maybe that'll be the solution. In fact, Canada and the UK have been trying to strengthen ties. And you know what? King Charles thinks that it would be wonderful if the UK and the US had stronger relations. And you know what? New Zealand and Australia, they're under threat from China. So you know what? We should form up with them as well and really unify under a 5-pointed star, or 5 eyes, as it were. And I know we're already sharing intelligence, and we've already circumventing the different intelligence rules about spying on our own people by sharing the spying data from these other Five Eyes countries with each other. I almost said Five Guys Burger and Fries. And the end result of that has been this wonderful integration where we can have our cake and eat it too by spying on our citizenry through a supposed third party. But you know what would be really great? If we integrated all 5 countries' economies, militaries, intelligence sharing, and had our own little European Union, but it would be like a 5-eyed union. Well, the public isn't going to go for that. Why would they want to sell out their own idea of sovereignty or community or the sense of country? It seems like that would be counterproductive to being patriotic and having a sense of nationalism. Well, we could start a little battle between the 5 different countries, little internal battles, right? We've already been divide and conquering for the last, 10 years. And you could get Canadians who are already fighting with each other over politics to now be angry at Americans. Americans are probably too busy with their lives to be angry at Canadians, but if we could generate some animosity there, and the great thing about it is out of conflict, out of chaos, we can impose some sense of order. Wouldn't that be great? A sense of order that includes unifying all the countries and, the idea then of Trudeau and Carney wanting to ban Canadian guns, which has been a thing lately, and actually taking over 1,500 models of firearms off the table and making them prohibited in Canada. Would that type of governance go away if we merged with the US? We would suddenly have access to all our firearms again? Or would that be a Trojan horse for the US to put in similar style of firearm registration and prohibition into the US model, further weakening the Second Amendment? There's all these different ways that they want to integrate, and it's always the most stringent government rules that they would base that unification around. It's never the liberties and the freedoms. Hey, Canada, do you want to join with us? And now you'll have a Second Amendment. You'll have a First Amendment. I know you can't criticize certain aspects of speech. You have to call everyone by their pronouns. You don't want to talk about certain World War II events without taking the proper side. Otherwise, you can go to jail. You can be fined. How would you like to have the First Amendment? Or would Canada and the US merging weaken the First Amendment? Would they maybe go, you know what, those sensible Canadians, they have it right. They're protecting their citizens from speech they don't want to hear because it troubles their emotions. Maybe we should do that in America. Maybe certain American states would want to merge with Canada, and other ones would want to stay themselves, and other ones would want to merge with Mexico. And that could create a great conflict, which we could then organize into a further union at the end of the conflict. Everyone will be so tired of fighting with each other, and we'll just be like, you know what, we should have unified all along. And maybe a nice integrated digital passport system. So this is all conjecture, but if you look at the history of Mark Carney and the groups that he's associated with and all the people that are associated with those groups, a few of the patterns start to take shape and you see this larger picture at play. What do I have against Mark Carney? Well, during the COVID crisis that was quite manufactured, we had a trucker convoy in Canada, and Mark Carney was an early supporter of the government crackdown against the Freedom Convoy. In fact, just before, a week before, the government invoked the Emergencies Act, which is a wartime powers act. They enacted that to supposedly have the legal jurisdiction and justification to evict and arrest not just the truck drivers, but anyone participating in the convoy. And Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland, who was our finance minister, who are very well known to each other in that Mark Carney is Chrystia Freeland's child's godfather. Well, they came up with this brilliant idea, unprecedented at the time, to freeze the bank accounts of people who were participating in or who had donated to the convoys. So even if you had given $10 to the convoy, say you needed to pay your rent that month, nope, we froze your bank account. You have no access to your money. Why? Because we're basically painting you as terrorists. So there's lots of Canadians who are still sore about the convoys, who think that it was a silly, version of January 6th, those Canadians trying to overthrow the government. No. The convoys were about the vaccine mandate that was imposed on truck drivers federally, saying that they couldn't drive across Canada or down into the States unless they did a mandatory jab. When they sit in their trucks, mostly alone, for most of the journey. So this was not about practicality. This was about compliance. And when compliance is not reasonable, is not logical, people are going to resist even more. And that's what happened. The truck drivers decided, if you're going to ruin my livelihood, because at that point, signals were available to see that COVID was not being stopped by the jab. Transmission was not being stopped by the jab. Breakthrough cases became normal. It did not prevent people from getting COVID. So, protesting against the mandatory imposition of vaccines when you know there's no logical or reasonable basis is a worthwhile cause to resist against. And that's what these people did. And it made a lot of people uncomfortable. And it inspired a lot of people to resist and have their voice heard on their own. And that's what a lot of people did as well. And so all the people who are still butthurt in Canada about the trucker protests are mostly authoritarians. People who like to see crackdowns on people who have their voice heard. And this just happened to be something where they felt morally justified because they're like, these people are so annoying with their loud honking and a whole bunch of bad things that were attributed, right? The trucker protest has been discussed to death, but it was vilified and painted by the media in the worst possible light, associating with Nazis. Everyone is a bigot there. They're misogynists. And all those character attacks, all those ad hominems are designed to sway public opinion against anyone who desires freedom or bodily autonomy. And so for those of us who experience that, we have a long memory. The only person that stood up for the truckers at that time was a guy named Pierre Poilievre. And I'd never heard of this guy before, never voted conservative in my life, but somehow he became the leader of the Conservative Party. And he's now saying, we're going to reverse the gun bans and prohibitions. We're going to, do all these things to investigate and make sure things like the trucker convoy, freezing the bank accounts and invoking the Emergencies Act for no reason, that's never going to happen. He's also said we're not going to work or allow any World Economic Forum cronies into our group, which sounds great. He's saying all the right things for a person who is freedom-leaning. Is Pierre a Zionist? Yeah, probably, which doesn't sit right with me, so that makes it really hard to vote for him. But am I going to vote for Mark Carney? Hell no. If your choice is between a central banker who is most likely going to be a Zionist pretending to not be one versus someone who's at least going to bestow a lot of your rights back to you, or privileges, rights, whatever they shouldn't be used interchangeably, but people are so confused by the concept. So the privilege of gun ownership in Canada is a right down in America. But that's one of the rights that we're looking to have restored. Same with your bodily autonomy. The Canadian government, you go to them with some aches and pains, they could prescribe you some medicine, but they also might ask you, have you thought about medically assisted suicide? It's like, what's going on here? So we just need a big change in Canada. And the Liberals, who, again, have been in power for the last 10 years, they would love to have another term in office to push through even more of the central banker agenda, of the further integration agenda, to take away more people's rights, to take away more people's access to firearms and other personal property, and to continue the liquidation and hollowing out of Canada as a country. And it's important that that doesn't happen. Let's close off by discussing why Mark Carney is someone that you shouldn't trust. If you already are on board with the idea that a central banker can't be trusted, that you have a larger picture understanding of the grand agenda at play and who Mark Carney represents, whose interests, and seeing his interviews, his debates, how out of touch he is with regular everyday Canadians, or really North Americans. He is at heart a European, and it's really interesting because if you look up Mark Carney and another famous lady, you end up with some images that are pretty telling, like this one. Here's Mark Carney in 2013 when he's now the Bank of England's governor, and here he is with Ghislaine Maxwell, which is Jeffrey Epstein's madame, who was helping him procure young women. So that's Mark Carney's wife. We didn't even get into the connections his wife has with a bunch of different NGOs and think tanks, and all of these things are geared towards creating the narratives of reasons for people to pay more in carbon taxes or extracting money from us peasants. And all these narratives are needed because they paint the picture of something benevolent, but underneath the surface, the intention is malevolent. It's to deprive us of our labor, of our energy, of our property. And so for all the people who are venerating Mark Carney as the second coming, he's going to rescue the Liberals, no more Trudeau, thank goodness, we finally got an adult in the room. Just be careful what you wish for, because for all the talk that Canada will always remain Canada and will never join with America, there are different factors at play here, and integration, centralization is the main theme. And whatever narratives they have to come up with to move further and further closer to that centralization, they're going to do, including manufacturing economic problems, wars, conflicts, crises. So be aware of that. If something happens and you're given a group that you're suddenly supposed to hate, question that. Don't let someone tell you how to feel about another group. Really do your research and learn as much as you can and see the humanity in everyone, even the people you disagree with. That's what's going to help us get to the next level so that we don't fall for this carbon tax Carney trap. So with all that being said, thank you so much. My name is Paul Verge. This is Grand Theft World, and we'll see you soon.